Hi, everybody, and welcome back to EVNet Stream. We recently published an article by Daniel dos Passos on the paradox of investment choice. And it was an interesting one. I thought I would catch up with Daniel and have a conversation around his thoughts and the research behind what he put and included in his article. So welcome to EVNet Stream, Daniel.
Thanks, Nestle. Glad to be here.
Okay, so let's get into it. This thing called the paradox of choice. What is it?
So paradox of choice talks to the theory of overchoice. And where overchoice comes in is essentially, if you've got a limited number of options, it's easier to make a decision as opposed to having numerous options. You then find yourself struggling to make a decision or a choice. One of the common examples which gets used, there's a number out there, but if you're watching Netflix, for example, and now you want to watch a program, you start seeing all the various program options and you end up scrolling for 10, 20 minutes, half an hour, and you never end up deciding to watch something, even though you decided you wanted to watch TV, but now all you've actually watched is a screen of various programs, you don't actually watch something. So the paradox of choice is kind of trying to deal with that thought decision process and trying to simplify it to a degree to try to find a way of refocusing your decision-making process and actually deciding, well, if I'm going to watch a movie, what do I want to watch? Okay, I want to watch a comedy, go look to the comedies and just make a decision out of, for example, your first 5 options, given that, especially from a Netflix point of view, they've already got an algorithm which is already screened in terms of what your preferences are. So instead of trying to go and look to 10, 20, 30, 40 movies down the line, you've actually just got probably what you're going to watch in the first 5 instances in any case.
So if I was an advisor and I was sitting in front of a client, being aware of this paradox of choice, what is the sweet spot? How many options should I show a client? And how should I be mindful of overwhelming them to a point of not making a choice, but then also giving them enough alternatives to be credible?
So financial advice is obviously always going to be a tricky one. And I think there's certain key elements which indirectly you can look to try to protect yourself and your clients as well before you actually start going down the rabbit hole of trying to make an investment decision. So you do have the general decisions of, are you a risk-averse client? Do you want to take on risk? What is your age profile? What is your disposable income? What are you comfortable with in terms of putting away from an investment point of view? How long do you have until retirement? What is your targeted retirement age? Once you ask a lot of those questions, it can already start putting various clients into certain buckets in terms of, well, you're not going to be happy with an aggressive equity portfolio, referencing offshore equities, for example, or you might be, especially if you're talking retirement, you're going to look for something Reg 28. Do you want a high equity product? Do you want a low equity product? Is the client more comfortable with a money market type return? Bringing the age into account, if you're closer to retirement, you probably want to reduce the risk. So once you've asked some of those key questions and try to understand your client better, then helps narrow your choice in terms of where you should be focusing on what they can invest in. And then I guess it comes down to giving them the appropriate advice from your point of view in terms of what portfolios you think fits their mold best. I think it's probably the best way to start.
And from a retirement fund point of view, where we've seen regulations come out that suggest that trustees have a default portfolio in place. I was discussing it with someone this morning. Probably less than 5% of members in a retirement fund context make an active investment selection away from the default. Is this apathy or is this a paradox of choice problem?
So I think more apathy than a paradox of choice problem. I think, for a lot of people, there's a default. They get told to what to invest into. They're unfamiliar with making the investment decisions. And this is kind of what, if you read through some of the behavioral side of paradox of choice, what it ends up talking towards is that people who are less informed or less experienced within something, they're generally more comfortable with a simpler decision because they don't necessarily know what to choose and they can choose something. And, they get overwhelmed by too many options in terms of where to decide. Whereas an experienced investor, or an experienced individual within various other aspects, once you know what it is that you're looking for and you're looking to play specific themes or have specific investment objectives, or your focus is around something very more detailed, once you've got a breadth of knowledge and experience in terms of how to invest, they then start making more specific, nuanced decisions. So I think, you know, a default option, especially for an uninformed investor, is not necessarily a bad thing. It talks to the fact that they are investing. You're starting the key decision to invest, and obviously we know the effects of compounding over the life of the investment. So compounding is always important. And if you're unsure of what to invest, sometimes, and you know, as per the article, sometimes you need to decide on something that is good enough. Trying to find the best, you might never end up finding the best investment. If you do a lot of research or try identify what is the best investment, you might end up missing the opportunities. You might misunderstand the cycle. Markets can be highly volatile at the best, you know, at the worst of times, never mind when you start having a crisis as well. So it does become quite an interesting one in terms of, to make that decision, the more experience you have, probably the more confidence you have in making the decision. The less experienced you are, the less you know. Do your basic research, speak to an advisor as well. But you don't need to always necessarily overcomplicate in the fear of the so-called FOMO, or fear of missing out. So long as you're involved, you're probably already all right. I think is where I would pretty much guide towards.
So at this point, I will reveal that in my own personal investments, I favor passive investing, but possibly because I don't think I'm suffering from paradox of choice. I think I'm trying to just simplify my own decision making, and I realize I'm not the expert. So how does the discussion around active and passive fit into this conversation of paradox of choice?
So, and I guess if you go all the way back to the beginning, so originally you had portfolio managers who would actively manage funds, was a unit trust type scenario. The idea of passive or index tracking investments came around then again in the 1970s. There was a lot of criticism. I think a lot of the criticism has now fallen away. People realize that if you track a certain index, or if you've got a passive investment, it can perform just as well, if not better than other investments. There is obviously the fee argument in terms of lower fees from an indexation type of strategy. You know, that does compound over time as well relative to an active portfolio. But what also then ended up feeding into it is you had ETFs. So now, aside from just having a unit trust type investment or a mutual fund from an international point of view, you have now got ETFs, exchange traded funds, to trade on the market to give you your passive exposures typically. What has actually happened is, coincidentally, you're now getting actively managed ETFs on the market. So whereas before the ETFs was largely focused on passive investments, active managers have also now entered the ETF space. And that's where you start complicating your decision process. That now you've got an ETF, but before ETFs are passive, now there's active. You had an active or passive unit trust decision that could also be made, which also wasn't necessarily a simple decision to be made. And ETFs locally and globally have also grown significantly. That if you look at it from a JSE point of view alone, there is more exchange traded products currently trading on the JSE than what there is actually companies listed in the all share index. So between exchange traded notes, exchange traded funds, now actively managed ETFs, there's also the concept of actively managed certificates or various forms of exchange traded products. There's more of those on the market now than in terms of trying to choose a company to invest in on the JSE. So the paradox of choice has actually come back onto the JSE when looking at passive investments as well. It's not just a matter of choosing one or two passive products. You've got local equity, offshore equity, local fixed income, offshore fixed income, commodity type products. So there again, you end up getting overwhelmed in terms of what to choose from. So the paradox of choice is real. It's there for your experienced investors, as I mentioned. If you understand the various levers and what the various products are doing, it gives you a lot of tools to use from an actively managed point of view, or to include it within your portfolio. But at the same time, if you aren't experienced and you don't necessarily know the slight nuances between the various indices, it can become tricky in terms of how do you actually base your decision, which again then talks to doing a little bit of high-level research as opposed to trying to get stuck in the weeds of doing in-depth research and trying to understand something which can get complicated even for the most experienced investor.
So you're sketching a scene of an overwhelming choice, not only in the investment type of portfolio you choose, but then also in the type of product you choose. And you've raised this issue about ETFs. I mean, the rising prominence of this, particularly now with the actively managed, what would you ascribe that to?
Well, so from our side of things, we are looking to launch products. We're looking to from an FNB point of view, we are actually covering a lot the basic traditional indices in terms of our product range. So we try to keep it simple. There is obviously a number of other products out there which have expanded the focus and the nuances and factors and your various exposures that you can get from these products. That's just trying to give investors more than what they want. And I guess the key is to try and look through the noise and focus on what makes sense for you, especially as a starting point. Once you build out on your portfolio and once you understand the start nuances, and experience has to start from somewhere, then you can maybe start making slightly more decisions. If you do believe that there is certain value associated with certain managers or certain strategies, you can then make those investments. It also comes down to, do you want to be a self-driven investor making your own decisions, understanding that you might get it right or wrong, or would you rather actually give your investments to an active manager, whether it's a multi-asset or single asset exposures, to actually make those decisions for you? Are you necessarily going to be better or worse off? The research has shown that there is cycles where certain managers and certain factors perform better relative to others in certain environments. Now, trying to make that right call or get the right timing with that, I think even the best of us struggle, but there is potential there to unlock.
So to wrap this up, and we've said a lot in a very short period of time, but to wrap this up, to me, paradox of choice also sounds like fear, and almost this paralysis of not being able to make a choice because it is overwhelming and the information could be overwhelming. So given your experience and your views of the world, what would you encourage a nervous investor? How would you encourage him or her to start in navigating what is in fact very recently a very volatile investment market?
So that's true. Look, there is a lot of hesitancy when it comes to making a decision, whether it's investments or otherwise, when you are overwhelmed. And that hesitancy or fear is something which can actually be crippling. In my mind, I think the easiest way to try to simplify it is that once you've decided to make an investment, if you just take a step back and relook at the fact that you've gone through a decision-making process to make an investment. So always use that as your fail-safe to go back to, I need to make an investment. I've already made the decision that I want to invest. Okay. Part of that decision of what that you landed on in terms of what you want to invest, believe it or not, you probably already have a general guidance as to what you're wanting to invest into and why you want to invest and what your overall risk appetite is. You will probably already know yourself. I'm risk averse. I want to take on risk. I do like local equities, or I want to get in the stock market. I'm worried about, see interest rates are high. I want to get a high return on my money market type investments. Whatever that is, remember your fail-safe of you want to invest, your initial decision is to invest, and then just try and narrow down your decision-making process in terms of making an investment to simple terms. Start simple, and then once you get comfortable, then you can start expanding. It's, there's a number of analogies that you can look at, that you can use out there, but it comes down to a situation of go with what you know, go with what you're familiar with. Start small, I guess. Starting is sooner is better than not starting at all. And as you build confidence, you can then start expanding. Confidence is one of these things which we develop through experience, and you only build the confidence and experience by actually starting. So I think the simple answer is just remember, commit to the fact that I'm going to make an investment, and then stick to that commitment. Even if you invest in something which lands up working against you, it's a lesson learned as opposed to something of, okay, well, now I've missed out, because the fear of having missed out on something is probably going to come back and haunt you more than the fact that you've taken risk, you made a decision, okay, it didn't work for you, but now you've got some experience, got more confidence, and then you start progressing going forward.
You have a platform of learning from which to build on. Daniel, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but thank you for sharing your perspective on your article with us today. I'm sure we'll be chatting again soon in the near future. And thanks to everybody on EBNet Stream for watching.
Perfect. Thank you, Natalie.